We turn now to a special report on an important and open case, how Rochester police killed Daniel Prude after his brother called 911 seeking help. New tonight, city records show how police and city officials were stage managing this case, even playing up the potential danger that might have been posed by Prude, who would be the potential victim in a criminal case regarding the killing. Now, newly released emails show a scramble after he was killed by police, a first approach that looks clearly like deny and delay, keep the public in the dark, and keep the key body camera footage secret. These documents show that access was prevented by Prude's family. A top police official told his boss the rationale was to basically defend the police, separate this incident from the wider concerns about such protests around the country, and prevent people who might, quote, misinterpret the officer's actions or conflate the incident with the recent killings of other unarmed black men. Instead of an open-minded investigation, what these documents suggest is an officer writing that any such link was a, quote, false narrative and risked creating animosity. Then the boss inside the police unit responds, I totally agree. Now, many of these controversies, whether you know about this individual case or policing writ large, it turns on what people think police do. Do they investigate and independently find facts, or are they sometimes biased when facts involve what police did and how they investigate themselves? I want to tell you, that issue is on display in this police report because initially, in writing, they describe Prude, this gentleman who was killed, in a fairly neutral way as, quote, an individual. Now, Prude's own brother called for mental distress help. There was no known alleged crime at the time. But then look, from these new documents we learn, another officer circled that word. You see that individual on the left there, and then pushed for something that might be more sinister, writing in red, make him a suspect. Now, the context for this is when police arrived on that scene in March, Prude was not known to be a suspect of any previous crime. Instead, he was in great distress. Officers restrained him, placed a hood over his head, and pinned him. When the video was finally released, it shows officers forcefully pressing Prude's face to the ground and contradicts other claims in that initial police report.
No, no, great. I mean it. God bless y'all.
Give me that gun, not me.
All right, take it.
No, I got it.
I mean,
I'm already in it.
drag me, kill me. It's easy to
Now, the arresting officer had said he simply tried to restrain Prude, but the video shows him leaning heavily on Prude's head for at least 68 seconds, only stopping when Prude passed out, as the New York Times account shows. Prude's death was ruled a death by suffocation or asphyxia. There was also PCP found in his system. Now, the elements here, the evidence of a potential cover-up, is a reminder of how these cases can be so systemic, which means larger than any single person, be it a police officer or a police chief or a politician. I say that because the Democratic mayor of Rochester has asserted that she's against police brutality, and then had said once this started to come out that she was out of the loop.
I also want to be very clear today about what I knew about Mr. Prude's death and when I knew it. Chief Singletary never informed me of the actions of his officers to forcibly restrain Mr. Prude.
Now, informed or not, the mayor has civilian authority over police. She could have reviewed that video any time. But here's what's worse tonight. Newly released emails from those first weeks of the process show the police chief at least stating in writing, quote, the mayor has been in the loop since March 23rd. And critics say it all shows a systemic instinct to cover up and hide alleged police brutality rather than fairly investigate it. We turn now to someone who has worked on these issues for decades. The Reverend Al Sharpton is, of course, president of the National Action Network and a colleague here as host of Politics Nation on MSNBC. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Gary.
We look at the evidence that's now emerged, and you believe it shows what?
I think that it has gone beyond a cover-up to a crime. When you have a police officer saying, make him a suspect, now you have a proactive move to not only prejudge the investigation, but to actually come to a conclusion by making the victim the suspect. This officer ought to be charged. because you have engaged now in trying to not only tamper and tarnish with an investigation, but to try and criminalize a victim even before you have come to a objective conclusion with an alleged objective investigation.
Let's dig in on that, what you're walking us through. We'll put it back up on the screen here, the police report. A lot of Americans would like to believe that a police report is just the facts, ma'am, like Dragnet. Walk us through what we see here, Rev, because you're saying these red circles on the left show they were going to call him an individual, and then the movement to suspect, you call it tampering. Why?
Because there's no evidence at all that this Mr. Prude was a suspect of any crime. So to deem him a suspect is to knowingly tamper with the evidence, knowingly tamper with what you're filing as an officer of the law. And you have decided that in some crazy kind of rationale that we want to not hook this up to what's going on around the country, justifiably around George Floyd and others, that you're going to therefore criminalize a victim who died in your custody. And that in itself is a crime. Not only do we find out later that the cause of death was different than what they said, we now find out that they, in a very clear and proactive way, tried to criminalize a man who had died, whose brother only asked that he be helped because he was facing issues. Now you're going to criminalize him in the name of you want to maintain some peace by disrupting and by demeaning and distorting and defaming a man that can't defend himself. That is a criminal act, and this officer ought to be under criminal investigation.
Understood. And that's why I think these documents, this new evidence is so important. The other thing I want to ask is about policy. Longtime MSNBC viewers do know that in some ways, and I could say this since we're friends, there's old Rev and new Rev. You know, new Rev has leaner suits, and you've adjusted your vibes in some ways. But one thing that's always been consistent, old Rev and new, is you have always said, you said this years ago when it wasn't necessarily on the front burner, that the policy solution has to be independent probes because police can't investigate themselves. You've gone down and done trips with families that weren't on the national headlines and said that's what they needed for justice. I'm just curious what this kind of case shows and how much closer do you think we are to that being a kind of a national solution if we want to get to the facts?
Well, this gives you a case in point as to why we're saying police cannot investigate themselves or police themselves, because had it been left there, we probably would never know exactly what is happening. The fact that in New York now, when you have police killing, it is given to the state attorney general's office outside. You cannot have police investigate police matters because they tend to do what this officer has so blatantly done. They try and doctor up things, and that is not an investigation. That is a setup. And usually the victims are the ones that get set up here. And this is a case in point while we ask for independent investigations and independent prosecutors. And an independent prosecutor ought to bring this police in front of a grand jury, because that paper that you have, that document you have, should go in front of a grand jury because it is a criminal act to tamper with evidence.
All makes sense. And again, something you've been on for a long time. We should mention for viewers, there has only since the public disclosures now been a newly arranged investigation, and the state attorney general's office says they're looking at it. We'll keep everyone apprised of the case. Reverend Sharpton, thank you, sir. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.